Welcome to the Deep Voice Show. On today's topic, we have our guest, David Goa, and we'll be talking about science and the sacred. Here's our guest, David Goa.
Hi, Derek.
Hello, David Goa.
I've been kind of interested in this whole question of how people that are involved in science, whether we see within that framework both a regard for the sacred as well as some sort of language of the sacred. And about, I can't recall, a decade ago or so, I got a phone call from a colleague of mine who worked internationally in the museum world. And he told me that he had been hired by NASA,
Really?
the American Space Agency, to build an interpretive center on the mountain of Mauna Kea, on the big island in Hawaii.
All right.
Now, the interpretive center was to be in the town, Hilo, which is right at the foot of this volcano. He said that the Mauna Kea, the volcano, is the finest place from which to view the north sky, the northern hemisphere.
Why is that?
It's because you have an island within this huge ocean, the Pacific Ocean. And one of the things that electronic telescopes need, well, all telescopes need it, is great stability
Okay.
and very little change in temperature and no dust and no light. So over really quite a number of decades now, you've had major astronomy installations, electronic telescopes and what have you, installed at the top of Mauna Kea. The Germans have one, the French, Canada does as well, and then several agencies in the United States, including NASA and the Smithsonian, and also the Japanese. So I think it's the largest installation of telescopes in the world, if I'm not mistaken. And it is, it's pretty high up there, so you can't, the astronomers would book time and go up the mountain and spend the night or some time, but they usually stayed down below, or at least halfway down the mountain. So my colleague said that he had come there to build this interpretive center on Mauna Kea. On the one hand, this extraordinary installation of astronomy instruments with several hundred scientists working. And on the other hand, it had become clear that the native Hawaiians viewed the mountain as sacred.
Okay.
So there had developed a bit of a dispute. The native Hawaiians said, "This is our mountain. What are you doing here? Why are you polluting it with your equipment?"
Yeah.
So it's really an indigenous rights issue. Now,
That's fair.
the senator from from Hawaii was a Hawaiian, native Hawaiian, and he was a fairly powerful senator at the time in America. And so he had really pressured NASA to try and resolve this issue. And it came to a focus around this new interpretive center. So my colleague called and said he had this problem. There was this big dispute, and he couldn't even get people to talk to each other from the astronomy side or the native side. And he was very concerned that he was going to lose the whole thing. And then he said, I know that you have this, you spent a lot of time talking with people on different sides of issues, and you're the only one I can think of who might be helpful here, so could you come, and could you come quickly? How do you navigate serious conversation across different ideologies?
Yeah.
I've often argued, Derek, that deep theology is the antidote to all ideology.
Really?
Because theology has the capacity to hold opposites together. whereas no ideology has that capacity. So in any case, I went to Hawaii, and I'd never been interested in going to Hawaii. I'd actually always thought of it as sort of the seventh rung of hell, because I'd identified it as a tourist place. I knew nothing about it. And I also hadn't really realized how big the Pacific Ocean is until I got on that plane and looked at the map. And I said, there is no place to land anywhere. So it was a surprising experience for me. So I arrived, and I spent 3 days or so. So my colleague gathered the astronomers and the representatives of the native Hawaiians who had this concern, this cultural and political concern. And it was obvious that there was tensions. They'd never talked to each other. They both saw themselves lined up oppositionally because of their vested interests. So I thought a little bit about this. I did some reading ahead of time on a little bit on Mauna Kea, a little bit on astronomy, because I know next to nothing about the sciences, and a bit on Hawaii and the native Hawaiians. I read about how that area was settled, not all that long ago, 1,000 years ago or so, by...
very fascinating story, how the Hawaiians were able to navigate that huge ocean and they'd be able to find that small island in the middle of that massive ocean.
It's an extraordinary story, yeah. This open ocean canoeing.
But even their ship designs and their art, I mean, it's a fascinating culture.
Right. So I had just a little bit of knowledge about that. So I arrived the first morning. And I've always thought that the way to get to a serious conversation is to actually know something about the people you're talking with and know a little bit about what they really care about, know a bit about their formation. How did they come to love what they love? You could put it that way. So there were several people around the table as well, speaking to your comment, who were actually part of this renaissance in the Hawaiian community of open ocean canoeing.
Really?
There's a renaissance taking place of this. So they do it and take some people with them. So I turned to the scientists first and asked them a little bit, several of them directly, a little bit about how they came to love the celestial world. And I remember one of them, a man who actually is the one who schedules all the time on the mountain. He's a very sophisticated astronomer working on the big questions. Like the Big Bang and what have you. And he got a little smile on his face, and he said he grew up in Iowa on a farm and in the cornfields of Iowa. And he said, I remember every time I go up the mountain, I remember that 7-year-old boy, he's referring to himself, who wanders out in the cornfield late in the afternoon on a fall day and falls asleep in the cornfield, only to wake up when it was dark and looking up at the sky and seeing this unbelievable wonder of stars and the new moon. He said, I ran to my father and I said, Papa, come, look what I discovered. So it's the first time that he saw the heavens as a kind of unbelievable glory. he talked, like a poet about this experience. He talked about how that love was kindled in him when he was 7, and that it led him to become an astronomer, and that it stays with him every time he's up on top of Mauna Kea.
Almost seem to define working in all creation.
Yes, he had no, this man is an atheist. Certainly most of them were. They made that clear. That's perfectly, I frankly could care less whether you're an atheist or not in that kind of conversation. But his sense of the wonder of the cosmos was profound. There was another man, German, a man who loved the music of Bach and the writings of Goethe, so we have that in common. He actually talked about his atheism in a very philosophical way. He had read Nietzsche and many of the German philosophers. Very bright man, very interesting. And later, or maybe it was earlier the next day, I was actually talking a little bit with them about how you communicate to the public something as unimaginable as the Big Bang.
Yep.
And the light years that they speak in. I mean, these terms are just to the lay people like me. I can't get my mind around them. I hear it, but give me some way of understanding this. And this scientist began to talk about that infinitesimal second. And he put a date on it, billions of years ago, when the Big Bang occurred. And he was teaching me a little bit about how this all came about. And then he came to the point of saying, and in that infinitesimal second when the Big Bang occurred, the iron in your blood was formed.
Sounds like a preacher.
Oh, it was extraordinary. So he made the connection between this unbelievable event that they have theorized from billions of years ago and the chemical composition of our bloodstream. But there again, an extraordinary sense of the wonder of creation. So when I think of science and the sacred, I think of these men who don't have my sort of language of the sacred, but within their own discipline of science, they're not technicians. These are astrophysicists. So they have a very sophisticated understanding of their work and their science. But every single one of them had this wonderful, wonderful sense of the wonder and glory of all that is. I was very touched by it. And just similarly with the native Hawaiians, who were part of the Renaissance of open ocean canoeing. And their description, they have, of course, the sky, the stars for them, the constellations, are different than for us. They have an indigenous map of the stars.
Yeah.
Our map of the stars largely comes from Greek and Roman mythology. So they have their own narratives about that. And their descriptions of reading the stars and then reading the ocean.
Okay.
And deeply empirical, how to read the ocean so you could tell that there was land 2,000 miles in that direction. It was really quite extraordinary. And then one of them described when he first took the voyage from Fiji, I think, or someplace, and towards the Big Island.
The Hawaiians could actually figure out there's land 2,000 miles in that direction
Well,
with certainty.
they said that it's a combination of the movement in the water, some bird life, things of that nature, the way the wind feels. I mean, I know nothing about this, but it was a beautiful description of a kind of hypersensitivity and knowledge of the seascape, knowledge of the sea roads, knowledge of how things travel through the sea. So we think of that on land, but they think of it in the ocean. So it was beautiful. But here's one of the things that happened that the second day. So you have this dispute. These two groups have not talked with each other. I've spent the whole day talking with the scientists about vocation, about how they came to do this work, and about what they make of the mountain itself that's under dispute. What does Mauna Kea mean to you? And they spoke about that initially from a scientific perspective. It's a volcano coming up out of the ocean. The ocean is this huge sink. We have the finest telescopes in the world. It's the finest place for that. So we can study the northern skies, cosmos, in a way that it cannot be done anyplace else. And they spoke about it with great reverence and about what it meant to go up there, to ascend the mountain and to be there in the night doing that work.
But to the Hawaiians, that mountain is sacred to them.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to come to this now. So the day was spent on that. So the next morning, the next day, we were going to do the same with the Hawaiians. Mm-hmm. So I turned to their leader and he said, just a moment, I want to say something. I didn't sleep last night. I want to say something. I want to say something to you, the scientists. I have never heard any of you talk about our mountain before, yesterday. But the conversation that you had with David, that we listened to, about our mountain, I realize that our sacred mountain is also sacred to you. And I want to say thank you for speaking the way you did, and for you, David, for making this possible. And I think we can find a way to deal with this. And of course, halfway through the conversation with the native Hawaiians, I realized that the astronomers and the native Hawaiians had a common enemy on the mountain. And the common enemy was tourism. Because tourism brings dust and light and people messing around in your backyard. Mm-hmm. So I was there twice, on 2 different times on this project, and it has left me with a lovely sense of how scientists who are deeply engaged in seeking to understand the workings of the cosmos and the origins of time, that they have a deep feel and often a wonderful way of articulating their sense of the sacred.